tall order tonight. We're going to attempt, Yirtzeh Hashem, with Hashem's guidance, as always, have the opportunity to study another Midah, the Middos HaYom. And hopefully we're good. My plan tonight is to get through two Middos, to get through this past day's Midah of Netzach ShebeGevura, and also get us ahead of the curve into ShebeGevura, which I think is the ideal place for us to be. So we kind of can get into a schedule where we're constantly learning about the upcoming day's Midah, and we'll have the opportunity to spend the entire day with a little bit more awareness and perspective about what that day is meant to be accomplishing. So thankfully this is a good opportunity to do this, because Netzach and Hod are a coupled pair of Midot in a similar way, in the sense that Chesed and Gevura comprise two parallel components through which Sefirat finds itself as the middle ground, as the kind of the calibration between the two. And what we'll see is that Netzach and Hod are paralleled with Chesed and Gevura, and Yesod parallels with Sefirat. And so it's a good opportunity to kind of see two faces of a shared reality in these two components of Gevura. So what we've seen so far, again, just to bring us into the mind space, when we're dealing with the Midos, and we're dealing with this whole notion of how Hashem is Megala in the world, we understand that if Hashem creates a world, the world being finite is limited. That therefore, to whatever extent Hashem is Megala himself in the world, is also a limited Gilui. And so by definition, if it's going to be limited, there's going to be finite aspects that come across across the boundary from the infinite existence of Hashem into the finite world. And so as a result of that, we can pick up on what we refer to as Midot, right? They're ways that we can measure Hashem's Gilui in the world. And there's a system through which Hashem's Hanhaga comes to full manifestation within the world. And that's this notion of the Sefirot. So what we've been looking at is the Sefira of Gevura, and as the Ramchal talks about extensively, it's part of the whole system of Kabbalah, is that when you're dealing with the Hanhaga of HaKadosh Baruch Hu, specifically the Ramchal talks about there being two different systems of Hashem's Hanhaga, but when we're dealing with the Hanhaga, what's called Yosher, where you have this kind of mapped out system, there are interrelationships between the different Midos. And therefore, we find things like Netzach ShebeGevura, Hod ShebeGevura, ways in which the different Midos interplay within each other, and it's this intermeshed system. So we've been looking at this notion of Gevura, which is strength, resilience, resistance, inner fortitude. And tonight we're looking at the concept of Netzach ShebeGevura, which was today's Midah. And what we're seeing over here is, what we're going to look at over here is this notion of Netzach. So Netzach is a word that has a variety of connotations to it. On the one hand, Nitzuach means victory. So it means to succeed or to conquer. It has the connotation of eternity, infinitude, right? Lenetzach nitzachim, for all of time, for all eternity. It also has the connotation of a conductor, like it is in Tehillim, Lamanatseach, so the conductor. So there's different connotations that the word comes across with. What I want to look at with you guys is this notion of the victory. How victory and eternality kind of interplay in this Midah. This notion of Netzach being eternity, and also the fight, right? The eternal fight, if you will, which is the Midah of Netzach per se, and how that expresses itself as a component of Gevura. There's a great quote I came across from this ancient mythic Greek warrior named Telamon of Arcadia, where he says, it's one thing to study war and another to live the warrior's life. And that idea is that when we're dealing with Gevura is not just a theoretical concept where a person has this inner resistance or doesn't, where they act upon their values or they don't act upon it. There's a lifestyle, there's an eternal commitment that is included within the notion of Gevura. And that is that when a person is truly a Gibor, they're always a Gibor. Meaning that quality of Gevura that they have doesn't take a break. There's no point at which he's like not fighting the fight, right? In other words, you might not be at battle right now, but you're constantly engaged in the whole notion and the conquest of the mission that you've set off upon. Even if you happen to be staying over the night, you're still continuously on the mission. And we see HaKadosh Baruch Hu described in this way in a number of different places. But one of the most beautiful places where the Torah uses this is in the very famous story of the tearing away of the Malchut of Shaul by Shmuel. After Shaul fails in his mission to successfully kill out the Amalekim, so Shmuel turns away, right? He tells him that you're going to lose the Malchut and it's going to be given over to somebody else. And Shmuel turns around to leave, and Shaul grabs onto his garment, right, onto his cloak, and tears off a piece. And Shmuel uses that as a prophetic symbolism to indicate a deeper truth that Hashem was trying to convey. And Hashem says, Hashem has torn away the Mamlechut Yisrael from you and will give it to your friend who is better than you. And he says, and don't make any mistake. Don't think that if Hashem has said this, that there's going to be any, go-backsies or any sort of mechila or compassion or, you know what, we'll let you stick around for another term. Says the Navi, V'gam Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker. The eternal one of Israel, or the eternal, victor of Israel. The Baal HaNetzach never lies. V'lo yinachem, and he does not reconsider. Ki lo adam hu lehinachem. God is not human, in as much as he would not reconsider a decision as this. And today and right now is not the time and place to discuss how there are many instances in the Torah where it does say Vayinachem Hashem. But as far as the purposes over here, what we're seeing is that when Hashem is Megala himself as Netzach, and again, as I've mentioned, these are different aspects of how Hashem manifests in the world that are not always happening and always present. These are aspects of how Hashem can express himself in the world. Sometimes different Midos are more present, more potent, more active, and sometimes they're recessive and not playing a dominant role. So there might be times where Hashem is Yinachem. But in an instance when Hashem is expressing as Netzach Yisrael, the eternal one of Israel, the one who is constantly at war on the behalf of Israel, God is eternally committed to the battle that he fights. And we've pointed out a few times already that when Yirmiyahu describes the destruction of Israel and the first Churban of the Beit HaMikdash and the exile of the Jewish people, so the way Yirmiyahu describes it is that Hashem says, "Azavti et beiti," I have forsaken my home. Natashti et nachalati, I've uprooted my inheritance, my home base. And he says, Natati et yedidut nafshi lekaf oiveha, I've given over the beloved of my soul into the hands of their enemy. Which, if you think about it, is an unbelievable determination. How many of us would fall apart under in such a circumstance, to have to give over the mahmad einenu, the most precious and desirable thing in our eyes, in order for it to learn the ultimate lesson and to never cave and to never give in. If anyone who's here who's a parent or has any sort of role in influencing another person knows that even in trivial matters, it's so difficult to maintain a degree of resolution. Even if we've made up our mind that it's a valuable thing to be involved in, there's a commitment that is required in the pursuit of Gevura, in the living a life of a Gibor, which is truly nitzchiyut, which is an undying battle for establishing the values that we have decided we are going to embark upon. As we saw last time, that it doesn't just need to be beautiful, as Rabbi Yehuda Nasi told us, that a person's path in making choices and in executing judgment has to take into consideration the tiferet, the harmony, the integration of the details of one's own life and their own potential within the world at large. But what's coming to the forefront here is that can't just be a passing fling. In other words, that's not a decision that one reassesses every 5 years, right? That's not called Netzach. For HaKadosh Baruch Hu, the way that Hashem comes across in the world, the Netzach in Hashem's Gevura is that Hashem's commitments never waver. Like we say, Hinei lo yanum v'lo yishan shomer Yisrael. God never sleeps, He never slumbers, He's the guardian of Israel. And that God is constantly and consistently imbuing His will and His desire for creation, kaviyachol, into creation. There's never a cessation from God's ultimate desire and his dreams for creation, so to speak. Those things never go away. And so we also find this, in a number of other instances. The Torah talks about, after Amalek comes to fight the Jewish people. So we have this concept, Ki yad al keska milchama la Hashem da Amalek midor dor. There's this eternal intergenerational war that God wages between himself, as represented in the Jewish people, and the people of Amalek, and the Middot that they represent, the cynicism, the negativity, the coldness, the reductionism that is so definitive of Amalek. Those things are antithetical to God and will always be antithetical to God. And so one aspect of Gevura, which we're seeing over here, the Netzach ShebeGevura, is that a Gibor's quest is never over. And what that means is that there might be hard days, and there might be days where the Gibor gets up and he's really not in the mood of pursuing that battle and fighting for those values that he holds dear to. But it means that nonetheless, he's going to fight that fight. He's going to fight the good fight. I read a beautiful quote. There's a great book called The War of Art. If you really want to get a kick in the tuchus to get moving on your commitments in life, you read The War of Art, Stephen Pressfield. He brings a little story over there, and the truth is I did some research on the story. No one really knows who this quote is from, but it's a great quote nonetheless, where he says, someone once asked this writer, Somerset Maugham, if he wrote on a schedule or only when struck by inspiration. In other words, do you have a consistent schedule for your writing, for your output of your literature, or is it one of these like, when I'm inspired, then I'll sit down and write? So he responded with a very witty line. He said, I write only when inspiration strikes. Fortunately, it strikes every morning at 9 o'clock sharp. And the idea over there is that you don't wait for inspiration. A true professional takes inspiration into their own life by force. And that is that if they're going to live the life of a Gibor, then they're going to have a nitzchiyut commitment to that fight. And that means that even when they've got to drag themselves out of bed in order to fight that fight, and even if, as he continues on in the book, even if you're going to write 10 pages and throw them in the garbage a minute later, you know that you've got up and you've fought your battle, and you've kept your commitment true and strong amidst unimaginable adversity. And that's a secondary component, which is the eternal resilience of the Gibor. That it's not just that he maintains his value, but that he pushes through adversity, and that no matter what comes in his way, he's unfazed in his commitment to the battle, to the decision that he's made. And because of that, there's something that's very eternal and global about that decision. So that the Rambam says in Hilchos Sanhedrin, the 23rd chapter, and is basically quoting straight from the Gemara, which the Gemara says that the Rambam paskins that Kol Dayan shedan din emet la'amito, any judge who executes pure, unadulterated justice in its purest and most true manner, and again, parenthetically, we saw last time that true judgment, objective judgment, includes a sensitivity to the individual, includes an empathy, includes tiferet. Says the Rambam, anyone who executes true judgment, ki'ilu tikein et kol ha'ulam kulo. It's as if he rectified the entire world. The entire world? Sure, of course. What do you mean? V'gorem l'shchina shetishre b'Yisrael. And he causes Hashem's presence to dwell amongst the people of Israel. And that's because if a person takes up the mantle of true gevura, of judgment, of discernment, of clarity, of fighting for those values that they know to be true, they've taken their place in the partnership with God in fighting for the nitzchiyut of emet, of truth, of consistency within our world, as individuals and as a whole. And that's why we're told throughout, it's one of the most frequently spoken about concepts, especially when you read through the Navi, the notion of tzedek tirdof, chase after justice. Don't let it be something passive. Don't let it be something that when you have the opportunity you do it. Chase justice. Run after it. Leman tichyeh, in order that you live, says the pasuk. You think you're going to live a life without chasing justice? I mean, how many times a day are you confronted with a justice-related situation? It's not the point. It doesn't matter if you're being confronted with it. You need to be running after justice. The fight needs to be eternal. And so we find this reflected all throughout the writings. Yeshayahu tells us the beginning of Yeshayahu, when he's ripping on the Jewish people for their pathetic attempts at bringing korbanos in an empty way, which lacks any of the integrity and true desire to build closeness with Hashem. So Yeshayahu tells them, I don't understand, why are you're trampling my courtyard, you're coming into the Beis HaMikdash, you're slicing up animals, splattering blood all over. Mi bikesh zot mi'atchem ribos chatzeirai. And when Yeshayahu tells the Jewish people, he says, Limdu heitev, learn goodness for God's sake. Dirshu mishpat, seek out justice. And these people are sitting there thinking like, seek out justice. I just want to get past my Chilul Shabbos I did last week. No, you missed the picture. It's not about your stupid little Chilul Shabbos and shechting the animal in the courtyard. This has to do with the world. It has to do with being done din emet lamito, rectifying the entire universe under a quest for mishpat, for bringing the entire world together under divine justice. Ashru chamotz, shiftu yatom, rivu el manah. Take up the battle for the downtrodden, for the widow, for the orphan, for those who can't defend themselves. Make the battle for justice an endless quest on your part. And we also find this, the Gemara says, Kol Talmid Chacham she'eino noter v'nokim kenachash, einu Talmid Chacham. The Gemara says that a Talmid Chacham who doesn't fight back for the honor of the Torah, he's not a real Talmid Chacham. He can know tremendous amounts of Torah. But if you don't stand up for honor, if you don't have a backbone when it comes to values, if you aren't willing to put yourself on the line and commit yourself to that battle, you're not a Talmid Chacham. That's just not the way it goes. And so Netzach ShebeGevura calls upon us to fight the good fight, even when we're not feeling it. To realize that commitment to justice is eternal. That if we are going to be resilient, we must be eternally resilient. And to take that upon ourselves and recognize that the same way that Hashem is the Netzach Yisrael lo yishaker, we should strive to have within ourselves and to live our lives as reflections of the Nitzchiyut of Yisrael. And to not allow ourselves to succumb to momentary desires and being strayed, lo tatur acharei levavchem v'acharei einechem. Maintain a commitment to being done din emet la'amito under all circumstances. Now, we're going to look quickly, if you'll bear with me for a few more minutes, to look at the next midah. We're going into tomorrow's midah of Hod ShebeGevura, glory within justice. What is glory within justice? So, to open up this concept of the differences really between Netzach and Hod, I want to direct your attention to a Gemara in Maseches Brachos, Daf Nun Ches Amud Aleph, right at the bottom of the Daf. The Gemara says over a brisa in the name of Rabbi Akiva. And it says, darshaning the famous pasuk, especially if anyone who's studying the Sefiros, this is like the most famous pasuk in all of the whole Kabbalistic approach to understanding the system, because this is the pasuk which describes these 7 Middos. That we say it every day. L'cha Hashem ha'gdula v'ha'gvura v'ha'tiferet v'ha'netzach v'ha'hod ki chol b'shamayim u'va'aretz l'cha Hashem mamlacha v'misnasei l'chol l'rosh. Very famous pasuk, Divrei HaYamim. And so the Gemara says an amazing thing. Goes through each one of these words and tells us what it is. And for our purposes, we're just going to focus on the last 2 in the list. Rabbi Akiva says, L'cha Hashem ha'gdula, to Hashem is greatness. That was Kriyat Yamsuf, the splitting of the sea. V'ha'gvura, Hashem's might, his gvura, the midah that we're dealing with here, zu makas bechoros. That is the strike on the firstborns, the plague of the firstborns. V'hatiferet, what was the beauty? Ze matan Torah. That was Matan Torah, the Tiferes, Lamuzei Baten, the incredible opportunity, the Keser, the Gemara talks about the Ksarim that each and every member of Israel received two crowns from the Malachim who came flying down. Says the Gemara here, this is the point that I want to focus your attention on. The HaNetzach, Zo Yerushalayim, the eternal, this is Jerusalem. V'hahod, Ze Beit HaMikdash. The Hod, the glory, is the Beis HaMikdash. What is that supposed to mean? Netzach is Yerushalayim, and Hod is the Beis HaMikdash. So of course there's many different explanations that are offered for such a Gemara. I just want to offer you one insight to it that ties it into these 2 middos. And that is that Yerushalayim is the eternal city. Rabbi Sachs beautifully says it's the eternal city for the eternal people, the Netzach Israel. And that is that Yerushalayim never goes away. As a city, it never has gone away. It's been an eternal presence in our lives from the birth of our people, from the beginnings of everything, from Avraham and Yitzchak and Yaakov. If you look at the Rambam talks about in Hilchos Beis HaBechira, the Makom of the Mizbeach is the place that we were formed. The entire notion of Yerushalayim as a place is at the foundation of the world. It's the foundation of everything. And in that sense, it's eternal. But the Beis HaMikdash is not always there. The glory that is the Beis HaMikdash has only been present for small pockets of our history. In fact, we've spent close to 2,000 years praying every single day, the desire to come back to see that incredible glory, the Hod Tiferet Beiteinu, the incredible home, that the majesty of Hashem's presence is fully manifest. Hod is something which mirrors Netzach. It speaks of the eternality of Hashem's Gilui in the world, but it's not always at the forefront. It's something that's much more personal. Often, Hod lives under the surface. And that even when the Nitzchiyut is not being manifest, we can understand that there is an underlying glory that lives at the core. There's a beautiful commentary by the Malbim where he speaks this out in his parish on the Chumash. And I'll read to you the critical lines over here. He's commenting, and he says an amazing thing. He's just talking about the difference between Hadar and Hod. Hod v'Hadar, right? We often talk about those two things, kind of collectively. Hodcha v'Hadarecha, right? So he says, what is the difference between Hod and Hadar? And the Malbim says, Hod is a thing shehu ha'inyan ha'pnimi hatsuri'i ha'miyafet ha'davar mitzad tzurato. It's the inner essence of a thing, which gives expression and beauty to it as far as its own essence, as far as its own construct. Kol echad lefi mashahu, whatever that thing might be. And he says, therefore, Kol ze inyan pnimi atzmi. This is an inner selfhood, the notion of Hod. V'alakein lo nimtza mimenu hapo'al. And therefore, we don't always find it coming into activity. We don't see it actually manifesting in action. It can live dormant within a person, but doesn't take expression, but nonetheless, it's there. Now, why is this an important recognition? Because as I mentioned at the beginning, the Mekubalim see parallels between Netzach and Chesed on the one hand, and Hod along with Gevura on the other hand. Gevura, which has a connotation of holding back, of resistance, right? Ezo Gibor HaKovesh et Yitzro. Oftentimes, the Gibor has to hold back as the very expression of his Gevura, right? As we've seen many times already. And so the notion of Hod ShebeGevura is that in the holding back, in the resistance, in the maintaining value within, is often the greatest expression of the Gevura itself. So in other words, and as I've mentioned this already, the Mekubalim see that Chesed, Gevura, and Tiferet are really the entire construct of the Anhaga of Hashem, and Hod, Netzach, Hod, and Yesod are kind of the birth products of these three Middot. So the Hod that exists is not just that the Gibor holds back. Like I'll give you an example. If the Gibor has an opportunity to act and doesn't, so often we see that as a lowering of value, right? If someone has an opportunity to jump in, let's say you're walking by and this poor homeless guy is getting beat up on the street, and you don't jump in to help. So the very fact that you didn't jump in, that you were kovesh et yitzro, and you exercised gevura, is not an expression of Hod in that instance, because it doesn't speak of an inner conviction to value. It doesn't speak of what it means to be the Gibor on the inside. What Hod says is that when Hashem doesn't act, when Hashem utilizes the midah of Gevura, it's expressive of a deep inner value. And that the concept of holding back has that innate component within itself. And so we have this notion that's manifest, and again, I want to point out, for our purposes, we're really trying to focus on how we can live the Middot, how these Sefirot are manifest in the Torah as the instructions for living, as an instructions for living our lives in parallel, in mirror image of Hashem. So this concept, I think, is brought out in the Gemara right at the beginning of Brachos and Daf Vav Amud Aleph, where it's darshan in the pasuk L'choshvei Shemo, where the Gemara says, Rav Ashi says that if a person intends to do a mitzvah, chashav adam lasos mitzvah v'ne'enas v'lo asa'a, and something outside of his control prevents him from doing the mitzvah, ma la'alav akasuv ki'ilu asa'a. The Torah considers it as if you actually did the mitzvah. How's that possible? I thought mitzvahs are about bottom line, right? Did I do the action? Did I not do the action? Did I shake the lulav? Did I not shake the lulav? What the Gemara is saying is that the mitzvahs have a lot more to do with who the person is who's doing the mitzvah, right? Who are you shaking the lulav? So if you're doing the action devoid of value, it's just as much a parallel to the guy who doesn't jump in to save the homeless person. It's devoid of the inner conviction that should be underlying a person's decision to either fight the fight or hold back, as it might be. And so for a person to desire to do the mitzvah, to chase after the opportunity to do the mitzvah, and ultimately not have the opportunity to, in essence is the same as somebody who actually would have fulfilled the opportunity of doing the mitzvah. So I just want to close with you with one more really beautiful Gemara over here, which says, the Gemara says in Avodah Zarah that the person is supposed to desire the mitzvos, not the schar of the mitzvos. The Gemara in Avodah Zarah, Yotes Amud Aleph, says, "B'mitzvosav chafetz ma'od." He desires greatly the mitzvos. Amar Rabbi Lazar, "B'mitzvosav v'lo b'schar mitzvosav." A person should desire the mitzvah, not the outgrowth of the mitzvah, not the reward that you'll receive as a result of the mitzvah. Because to desire the mitzvah means you have that hod within yourself. You desire the value. You identify with the value that the mitzvah is, not with the paycheck that you'll get at the end of the day. And the Gemara goes immediately into quoting the Mishnah in Pirkei Avot, which says, and that's what it says in the Mishnah, Al tiyu ka'avadim ha'mashamshim es harav al manas lekabel pras. Don't be like those who serve their master in order to receive a reward. Rather be like the avadim who serve their masters shelo al manas lekabel pras. That the idea is that you shouldn't be doing it out of an external motivation, but rather it should be coming internally. I just want to close, I said I was going to close before, but just it's just too beautiful not to share this Malbim with you. One of the most incredible commentaries of the Malbim. This is a beautiful thing. The pasuk in Tehillim says, Ashrei Adam oz lo bach misilot bilvavam. Praiseworthy is the person who has strength in God within him. Oz lo bach. His strength, his fortitude in God is within. Misilot bilvavam. Pathways within his own heart, it says. So kind of a cryptic pasuk. Praiseworthy is the person who has strength in God within himself. He has pathways within his own heart. And the pasuk goes on to say that ultimately, Yelchu mechayil el chayil, you will go from one strength to the next. Yera'eh el Elohim b'Tzion, and you ultimately will be seen by God in Tzion, in Yerushalayim, in the Beis HaMikdash. So the Malbim says something incredibly beautiful. He says, the meaning of the pasuk is as follows. Hagam she'ein anu yecholim ata la'alot el beit Elohim b'poel. It might be true that right now you're unable to go to the house of God, to the Beis HaMikdash, in action. That might be outside of your means and your abilities. There is no Beis HaMikdash. You're living in Galus. But bechol zeh, nonetheless, ashrei asher adam asher oz lo bach. Praiseworthy is the person who has the strength within himself. Asher hu bilti mityaesh, he never gives up hope. Rak mitzapeh be'oz le'yeshuat Hashem. He hopes with vigor, with incredible strength in the salvation of God. And he says, misilot bilvavam, what does it mean that he has pathways in his heart? Asher bilvavam yimatzu misilot kevushot. That a person who has this level of inner conviction, who has this gevura that's within himself, the misilot bilvavam, the hod, the values of the desire to live in the Beis HaMikdash, to be able to visit the Beis HaMikdash, that never gives up hope that one day, today, tomorrow, the next, I'll be able to be back at that place of the Hod Tiferet Beiteinu. that a person like this finds within himself misilot kvushot, deep down pathways within himself that until now had been covered over. Shebam yeshuvu l'tzion. And it's on those very pathways that he uncovers within himself, within his own heart. Those are the pathways that will lead him back to Tzion. Meaning to say, shahagam shamisilot ha'ela einam od bepoal, heim etzlam balev, even though those pathways currently don't exist, there's nothing physical to them. They live only in the person's heart. Shebelibam malei tikva ba'oz Hashem, that his heart is filled with a hope and a direct line of strength towards God. He finds within himself these covered up paths within his own heart, that ultimately it is those paths that will bring a person back to Tzion, back to the Beis HaMikdash, to the Hod that we saw mentioned in the Gemara. So what the Malbim, I think, is beautifully summarizing for us here is that Hod ShebeGevura means that a person never dies as far as their commitment to the values within their heart. Whether the Gevura is coming out on the inside or not, whether the Gevura means that they're going to act or they're going to resist, whether they're fighting the good fight in action or it's living as an ember within their heart. The Hod of that Gevura is the fact that those values are what's motivating you and keeping you up every single day. What gets you out of bed and what keeps you up at night is the Hod, that strength that lives within a person, which is that Hod, the Mesilot Bilvavam, that the Malbim is talking about. It's that Hod, that inner glory of a person, which ultimately is the solution to finding that Hod and to regaining access to the Binyan Beis HaMikdash that will Mirz Hashem be zocha to have b'mehera b'yameinu. So those are some thoughts on these two Middot. I'm sorry it took a little bit longer than I hoped for, but thanks for sticking it out with me. Mirz Hashem, we'll see you all tomorrow.